Welcome to the Vet Show, episode number 7, presented by HBI Auto. Coach Robb, how are you, sir?
Hey, good afternoon, my man. I uh I can't tell you how excited I am about this show today. I just got back from World Vets and I've got probably more questions than you may have answers for. I've never been there before. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
beyond excited to talk to you. You and I haven't had a chance to really decompress from the race weekend. I know this is your neck of the woods, but holy cow, what a race.
It's wild, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, I can't
So
wait to get into that. Let's start the show off, Coach, like we normally do. This is episode number 7.
yes, sir.
So, who comes to mind when you think of the number 7 in the moto world?
Oof. I think all the listeners will probably gravitate towards Stewart. I don't know about you, but I think that just kind of exemplifies it's like Ricky with number 4. But the person that's got a fond spot in my heart is Jeff Stanton. I've always been a big fan of his. I say this, I'm sure that he won't mind me saying it. He didn't get to wear 7 very long because he had so many years in number 1. But yeah, remember the Axo clothes and the red and white gear on the Honda. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was cool. I think it was Axo. God, I hope I didn't make a fool of myself. I want to say it was Axo, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah.
And I think he wore the Arai helmet, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. But the number 7 there, and of course you can't forget about the dogger. I tend to be more of an old school guy. Can't forget about Plessinger in today's day and age. But how
Yeah.
about you? When you think of 7, anybody
It,
jump out?
I mean, it's James Stewart. It's like number 4, right? Number
Yeah.
4 in my mind will never be anybody but Ricky Carmichael. Like, just
Yep.
I can't. When Chase went to number 4, I'm like, bad move. I, man, I almost wish, Coach, and I know this will never happen, but
Yep.
I almost wish they would retire some of these guys' numbers. Some of these legends of the sport,
Hmm.
they should just retire the number. I know that will never happen, but
Sure.
yeah, number 7, James Stewart, and of course, the people's champ, Aaron Plessinger, the
Yep.
cowboy. I think that number fits him well. So, but
Well,
yeah,
then
some of
you
the old
throw in somebody like Donnie Hansen. If anybody that remembers back in those days, Mr. Holshot himself. Can't forget about Albertine on Suzuki.
Albertine. Yeah, that.
Ezra Lusk. We had Ezra on it as well. So, and you know what? Think about everyone. I think almost everyone of the ones that we've mentioned. Did anybody not get number 1? Sans Plessinger. We mentioned Stanton. He went number 1.
Yep.
Didn't Albertine? He got number 1 one year, didn't he?
I think outdoors maybe.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then we know Lachine, he tore everything up. We know Hansen was a multi-time champion. Stewart,
Yep.
of course. Yeah, maybe there's something to be said about that number 7.
Well, then I think AP is gonna, and I love AP, man. He's one of my favorites,
Yeah.
but I I don't see it, man. He might break the cycle on the number 7. I don't know.
Well, and it'd be no fault of his own. It's kind of like when you were in the 125 class and you had to race against this little guy by the name of Ricky Carmichael. I mean, it goes without saying, if it wasn't for Ricky Carmichael, Tim Ferry would probably he would have a relatively impressive championship record if it wasn't for Ricky. Because
Yeah.
I don't know the exact year. One of our listeners will probably correct us in the comments below. But how many times did Tim Ferry finish second to Ricky in the 125 class? I know it's 2 or 3 minimum.
Yeah.
So
It
if you think about
was.
it, if it wasn't for Ricky, we'd be talking a lot about Tim Ferry and how frustrating it must have been because Tim Ferry was just a badass on a bike. Well,
Yeah.
he doesn't get the same coverage because of all the coverage Ricky got, and Ricky well deserved it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, it's like racing against McGrath. I mean, can you give me the 2 or 3 riders that finished behind McGrath in 5 Supercrosses? You could guess,
Yeah.
and there was
It-
probably the
it's
same 2 or 3 or 4 guys that were always right behind McGrath, but we don't talk about them because of the showtime.
what's crazy is it's still kind of like that today. Even though
Sure.
I think that the field's pretty deep, you still have those 3 or 4 guys that are going to be there no matter what.
Well, that I'm just paralleling with what you said with Plessinger, right? He's incredible on a dirt bike, but just happens to be racing against a guy by the name of Jet or Chase, or it's
Yeah.
like he's really, really good, but he's just got such a deep field that and think about this. Think about how many seasons have been dominated by only 2 guys. Because if you go back the last 3 years, right? If you go Jet currently and go back from that, and then you go Sexton before that, it's pretty hard to go. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's impossible, but you have to
Eli and
go,
Dungy.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so Plessinger's, and that's the thing that I think is so impressive with Kyle Chisholm. I had the privilege of working with Kyle while he was teammates with James Stewart. So I trained with Kyle at James's compound. And that was when they were on San Manuel Yamaha. So think about, I started working with Kyle Chisholm when he was part of the Toyota Moving Forward program back at Loretta's. And he came out when you had Nico Izzi, Austin Stroop, Trey Kennard, Matt Bonney, all of those studs, right? Kyle was in that group. Think about all the different generations of talent that he's come through now. Race against Chad, race against Ricky, race against James, race against Sexton, race against Jet, race against Roxon. You know, all those guys that were the top of the game. There's Chisholm just constantly in that 10 to 15 spot and still making mains today.
Yeah.
It's
That's pretty impressive.
well, think about it. This summer when Deegan goes on a 450, Kyle will literally be able to say his first year going pro. I don't know who was the top guy. I apologize. I don't have that number committed to memory. The year that he went pro, whoever the top guy was, how many times, how many people, if you were to call them, you know, the dominating personalities for that
Yeah.
2 to 5 years, and now Deegan goes up. Think about that.
Yeah. It's pretty impressive
It
how many
is.
legacies that he's ridden with, you know?
Yeah. And he's still competitive as heck. I mean, I always feel bad for him because if you ever see him ride, you're like, how can anybody go faster than that? And then he gets lapped by Jet. You're like,
I know.
damn,
It's wild.
it is. And you see it all the time on the West Coast. You know,
Yeah.
you watch Anderson out there on a Thursday, and you're like, there's nobody going to touch him on Saturday. And then he qualifies fifth or sixth, and then, you know, he gets fifth or sixth in the main. You're like, how can somebody be any bit faster than him? Which is what I
Yep.
love about racing in general. It's just,
It's really wild when you get to like some of the local tracks, right? Watch some of these local pros. Like
yeah,
here we have Derek D. Martell. He races a lot of the works and GNCC or actually work stuff now. He's rides for Beta, but
okay,
he's a local pro here. And you think, I mean, dude, he absolutely shreds. There's no way nobody could go faster than that. But then when he goes to a pro national,
yep,
he has trouble even qualifying, you know? So
yeah.
yeah, some of these guys are just absolutely insane.
Well, one of the epiphanies I had going to Glen Helen, you know, for World Bets last weekend was you look at somebody who's, I'm going to use this very generically and no derogatory connotation whatsoever. You look at guys that are like fifth or sixth at a look, you know, racing and they're so-called considered local. I don't know anybody from the East Coast that would even be able to compete with those guys. Like you go 15, 20 deep at California, the 20th place guy. And again, I'm a Florida guy. I'm not trying to dish on the East Coast at all. West Coast speed was something I've never seen before. And I've been to California quite a bit, of course, but the one thing that amazes me is, and I say it every time I go to California, you pull up to an intersection, and if you look at all four parts of the intersection, inevitably you'll find one, usually two trucks that has a bike in the back of it.
Yeah.
And it might be an enduro bike. They might have just come out of riding in the desert or whatever, but every single intersection, I would say conservatively, 95% of the time, you're going to find a bike. Like when I was leaving my Airbnb to go to Glen Helen, oh, there's Chaparral, you know, oh, there's Langston Motorsports. There, you know, I know they're not all in the same proximity, but you're just
Yeah.
like, look at all the, you know, not very far from PC. You pull up to Glen Helen, there's PC's two tracks, the upper and the lower track.
Yep.
You're like, okay, this goes from what you hear about, what you read about, what you see on video to like, this is reality. You know, and I'm standing there watching my athletes race and, you know, there's Bones. He walks by and he's just as casual and cool with him and his wife. And, you know, Joe Olaf came over and introduced himself to me. And then, you know, the guys from W Wheels came over and introduced themselves to me. And it was cool. I mean, these are people
Yeah.
that I respect. W is one of the companies I've always respected. You know, they just come over and introduce themselves and kind enough to say that they've listened to previous podcasts and all that. And then we get into a conversation, a question about health. And again, this isn't to dote all over California. Today, we're just talking about Glen Helen. But if you've never been there, I would encourage you to do so because it's as much of a cultural enjoyment experience. Um, this is kind of a side note, but when I say a joyful experience, I show up to Glen Helen. They charge me $10 a day to spectate. You go to some
It's
of these East Coast races. You know, I've gone to a couple of races. I'm not trying to be politically correct. I just don't need to create a shitstorm.
yeah.
But I've come to some races over here on the East Coast where you show up on the first day of racing you have to buy the wristband to spectate the entire week, and you have to pay cash only. We're talking
Wow.
up, yeah, we're talking upwards hundreds of dollars that I have to shell out to go
Jeez.
to watch one day of racing. No exceptions. I don't, I'm
Wow.
in my,
That's wild.
I'm in my Honda Civic with my son. I don't have a motorcycle. I'm not trying to sneak in and race. I'm just here to spectate with my son, and I have to roll out hundreds of dollars. I have to pay for the entire week. And I go out there and they charge me $10, and there's plenty of parking. And then you go to some amateur national championship races and you pay nearly $100 a car and there's zero parking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, what a stark contrast. That's what I'm saying. It was an enjoyable experience.
That's
What
good.
Bud and Lori do out there, I can't speak highly enough of it. It was from an East Coast guy, couldn't believe the experience out there. It was
Yeah.
economical, very well organized, plenty of parking, everything was well signed. I'd never been on the property before, but knew where to go to find everything.
Yep.
So props to that race. But I hope everybody who's listening, make it a bucket list. It's a heck of a
It's
race.
and I was gonna say that if you're into moto,
Yeah.
going to SoCal, whether you pack up and you go and you do some riding out there, hit the tracks, go to Pro Circuit, Chaparral, Langston. I mean, it's the mecca of motocross. It really
Troy
is.
Lee
And
Designs is right down the
oh,
road
it's that's
too.
an
Yep.
incredible shop.
Yep.
It's
And
just
and for those of you who haven't been there, not only is it the place that Pro Circuit operates out of in Troy Lee, but they've got a museum downstairs with all their bikes. A lot of people don't know that. Like
yeah,
you can go in there and just walk around like
yep,
a museum. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was surprised when I saw that when I went to Troy Lee to shoot the Whiskey Throttle with Ping. I couldn't
yep,
believe it. You can just walk in the lobby and there's Langston's bike, and it's just
yeah.
so cool.
Um,
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
if you are not going to go load up and go for like what I would recommend is you could go for Anaheim 1. Anaheim
Mm-hmm.
1 is the best Supercross race. I don't care what anybody says. It's the best. Just the hype, everything is great. The weather's usually pretty good in SoCal.
Yep.
Give yourself some time, go hit the shops, go do some sightseeing. And you can also, I think it's MX Vacations. There's a couple
Yes.
different
Mm-hmm.
companies out there that rent motorcycles. You can actually, you go to the track, they bring gear, they bring the bike, go rent bike and go ride Glen Helen. Because that's what I tell everybody. It's Glen Helen for me, Coach. You know this. I went last year because it was a bucket list thing, right? I wanted to ride Glen Helen. I'd never ridden Glen Helen,
Yeah.
and it is quite the experience. It's like you said, it's like nothing else,
Yeah.
and you have to ride Glen Helen a lot to be good at Glen Helen
Mm-hmm.
because it's like its own beast. Those hills,
Yeah.
Coach, you saw them in person. They're they're insane, and they
I
are
couldn't
much
believe
much steeper than TV ever shows.
that's what I was going to articulate as well. I remember I walked up next to the starting gate, and you're looking out at Mount Glen Helen, and you have to look up Mount Glen Helen. That first turn angle, the magnitude and the girth of that Talladega turn, words don't do justice. I've asked several people, I've had a couple different ranges because I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, if you got in an elevator and you push the button, what would you have to push to get to the top of Mount Glen Helen? I've heard anywhere between 25 and 35. So if there's roughly 10 feet to a story, right? Now, I'm deathly afraid of heights. I've ridden Millville when I was working with Spencer Daly and the Martin brothers. That track scared the piss out of me because you hit a jump and you can't see where you're going to land. And a lot of those jumps, as soon as you land, you've got to be on the binders, turn, pivot, and go right back down. That scared the snot out of me. I was white knuckled like nobody's other. When you look at Mount Glen Helen, I cannot begin to describe the rise over run, get to the top, pivot, and straight back down. Now, yeah, you see it on TV, but no, nothing does justice. I mean,
No,
I got goosebumps when I looked at it. And again, I'm still a fanboy of the sport. I love it. No matter how involved you think I am in the sport, I still am probably one of the biggest fans out there. I was like totally geeking out on this. I'm like, holy smokes, look at that thing. And I've said it numerous times. I cannot imagine putting that much trust in a counter sprocket and chain to drag race up straight uphill. I mean, it's almost
yeah,
like a hill climb
it is.
competition every lap.
Yeah,
And we'll talk a little bit about it. And I apologize, I should have gotten his last name. Tyler was racing that Stark bike out there. He's racing against Josh Moseman. And it gives you an idea of what torque can really do on
Oh,
those electric bikes. But that drag race, I even commented to a couple of people I was hanging out with. I'm like, every lap, this is like an AMA hill climb because
yeah.
there was a lot of jockeying going up and down that hill, and that's a heck of a place to have to try to pass somebody. I want to make sure that we talk about the one moto where everybody kind of went down at the top, and you'll see
Yeah.
why it's relevant to our conversation. But yeah, it's a very daunting. But going back to what you said, I think it's definitely, if you get a chance logistically, grab a gear bag, go out and do moto vacations. There's, like you said, Dan, there's several of them that are there,
Yeah.
first class. And man, I saw 20 bikes are available. Every color that is available
Yeah.
you want is there, but you've got to go experience it for sure.
It's like nothing else.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, coach, I don't get scared riding a dirt bike very often, but the first time I went up Mount Saint Helen, came down, right? And I'm on the brakes, like
Yep.
front brake, rear brake, dragging my feet, like, just slow down, stop. You've
Yeah.
got these guys, these local pro kids and stuff, pegged, pinned down the
Hmm.
hill, and you're like, holy crap, like
Yeah.
how in the hell?
Yep.
It's incredible. So yes, everybody's got to check it out.
Well, and it's a type of track that you can't run from fitness. Obviously, that's my wheelhouse and I love it. But when you look at that, you know, it's not easy to go uphill fast. I don't care what anybody says if you're doing it correctly. Then to come down and keep pushing yourself back so that you don't go over the bars. But the interesting part, and yes, you watch it on TV, but you've got to see it in person. Up the hill, down the hill, left hand turn, back up a hill, right
Yeah.
hand turn, down a little hill, back up another hill. And all that pushing back on your anterior deltoids, front of your shoulders, squeezing the living daylights out of the bike, core, lower back, trying to offset the braking bumps that just get absolutely nasty. The acceleration bumps going up were just insane in the amount of G outs. Yeah, I like it selfishly because I'm like, all right, that's a fit man's course. I'm going to be a little
Yeah.
bit, I'm a proud papa here, but like we have a Bud Guthrie's been on our team for a couple of years, quite a few years actually. He got second. We have Steve Nelson. He picked up a fourth. We had Tyson and Chase. We had some other riders that we were hanging out. They all did great. And it was interesting because these guys didn't get tired. Now, it's not because I'm smart. It was just they were ready for the demands of that race. What I couldn't imagine is going there and not being in shape because you're gonna see how out of shape you are in a short period of time because that track demands a lot. There's no running and hiding there. That's
No,
for sure.
and it gets rough everywhere.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so, I mean, and you've never ridden rough, I promise you,
Yep.
until you've ridden Glen Helen. And
Oh,
that is why, coach, I don't know if you probably know this, but all the factory teams, when they go test outdoors, why do you think they all go to Glen Helen?
at the end
Because
of the day,
at the end of the
they
day,
at the end of the day,
it's
it's
rough, it's
baked.
nasty.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
those potholes and those edges, and it's crazy because if you get to about that mid-afternoon, and yes, we see it at the pro nationals, but it's one thing when you've got pros, and it's another thing when you've got vet riders and you've got those really difficult shadows as you're heading back up Mount Glen Helen. So you go like even on the start, right? You go from bright, intimidating sunlight, boom, goes almost black. Then boom, you come out of that Talladega corner, and then you're back into broad daylight. Reminds me a lot of Washougal, when you see them kind of in and out. And I can't imagine your eyes trying to adjust to that as
yeah.
quickly as those guys are going. But yeah, it's definitely an experience that I hope everybody gets a chance to go out and do. Put it on your list for 2025 for sure.
The iconic Talladega first turn
Mm,
is, we talked a little bit about that. Coach, you can attest that it is nothing like you see on TV.
mm-mm.
And you would have a hard, I mean, if you were at the bottom of the turn and you were going to walk up to the top of the turn, you would have a hard time on foot doing that. It's that
Yep,
steep. It is incredible how
literally.
steep that turn is and how big it
Yep.
is.
Well, and when you look at the velocity that those guys, not to be reiterating what you just said, I went and stood as close to the first turn as I could get. And it's amazing, these big 450s come in there. It seems like they're going 80 miles an hour. And by the time they get through the apex, half their speed's gone. Like, yes, we know, but they're not using the brakes. That's just the velocity and the G force of going
Yeah.
up into there. Then, of course, you watch the pro classes like Brownie and Alessi and Nicoletti and I just words came and began to describe how early they get on the gas. And when like Rusty Holland, he was out there, and that's one of the things I was noticing with him is ability to get on the gas early was almost frightening. Like it was almost like the bike hadn't finished transitioning and he's already on the gas. And what's beautiful about that on that Talladega, the way that you can see when they hammer the throttle, you can immediately see, like some tracks, you get so much wheel spin, you really can't see the acceleration. Not on that track. As soon as they roll the throttle, you just get that burst out the back. It was very evident with the start bike.
Yeah.
That was crazy. But yeah, that first turn is something that's the amount of G forces that your body must feel. Maybe I'm not using the right description, but it just seemed like everybody would come in and it was just, and then
Yeah.
they would get back on it. But going into it, they were just seemed like wide open.
Well,
Um,
and
nice wide.
the dirt is pretty unique there, and
Mhm.
up on, especially up on that turn,
Yeah.
it's kind of deep, and it's kind of like this sand loam. It's kind of a weird mixture of dirt, but a lot of people, that's why a lot of guys can run up the scoop tire at
Yep.
Glen Helen because of the terrain. It's not super hard. It's kind of got a hard packed base, but
Mhm.
it's kind of sandy and loose.
Well, and you've got to give them credit because, when you come in, you come by the police department and you're
Hmm.
coming up the road, and then you turn right into the facility. You look at that dirt on either side of the road, and it closest thing to looking like you're on the moon.
Yeah.
And then you look at what they do with that dirt. The moisture was unbelievable.
Yep.
And lap times were 2.5, almost 3 minutes for some of the riders. That's a boatload of moisture with a track that's that long.
Yeah.
And what they're able to do, the magic they're able that that Bud and all of his crew at Glen Helen do, between the way they water it and maintain it, very well organized. Like I said, the way they communicated, you knew everything that was going on. So that dirt, of all the different places I've been to in California, it's the most unique. I think for you to
Yeah.
put the word loam in the same sentence as a California track, very unique.
Yeah. Definitely
You're
is.
not going to see it very often.
Coach, I wasn't able to go with you this time. I had been dealing with some health issues, so I
Yep.
wasn't able to make it. But it was your first trip out there. What was
Yeah.
the most impressive thing, or what is the thing that impressed you the most about just maybe the race, the track, just the racing? What was impressive?
This may come across as a strange answer, but you know where they have that the walkway that goes from the starting area as you make your way over towards the office, the
Hmm.
registration office. They've got that street, the Hall of Fame. They've got this the writing. What do you call it? Where they have the faces and the names. Like I hate the community of Hollywood. I don't think a movie star is anything that's
Yeah.
worth boasting about. But the way that they have like Mitch Payton on there, and they have the White brothers on there, and then they have standalone plaques on all the races that they held there, whether it's 250, 450 nationals, whether it was a works race, an MPG race. They've got like the highlights of the most important races of the year. To me, it was a walk through history. Like,
Yeah.
and I owe Alex Martin an apology. I honestly didn't remember him winning an outdoor national. And I'm sitting there reading the 250 class. Alex got first, Jeremy got second. And I was like, Dadgum, I didn't even know that. So to walk through memory lane, seeing the people on the ground, recognizing the indelible impact they've had on the sport, either as a racer, as a promoter, or like, with Tom White with White Brothers. You know, when I stop and think about a four stroke, and I think back when I started riding in 78, when you thought of the White Brothers, you thought of the XL 650, the big 600-pound four stroke that those guys would run in the desert. That's what I always felt like the White Brothers were so key on. Now you look at how competitive the four strokes are, and you have to lend credit where credit is due. And to me, that was the most impressive part, was they've acknowledged the history and the progress of the sport. They gave the riders their appropriate, accolades. Hey, here's the guys that dominated the year we were here in 2016. And you're like, oh man, I forgot about that name. Oh wow, I forgot about, Billy Leninovich or whoever it may be. And you're like, damn, that's cool. So to me, that was the most impressive, is that even though that track is such a part of the history of California, that track gives credit to those that have ridden there. It's almost like they were giving due respect back. We all dote all over the facility. The facility was like, hey, these are the people that have made this facility what it is today. And I thought that was a very cool contribution back. So that would be
Yeah.
my answer to that.
Anything that you didn't like, or anything that you weren't impressed with?
this is going to sound like a pet peeve, but I love listening to good announcers. The guy that they had there was phenomenal, and it was really hard to hear him throughout the day with the racing. Whether it was in the pit and that's not their fault. I mean, we had the Glen Helen winds blowing through, so I mean, a lot of the tents got taken away and all that. But yeah, if I had to get nitpicky about something, only because they had such a good announcer. These gentlemen, they had the fedora on. He just did a great job of interviewing. I would have liked to have heard more of what he was saying, and with there sometimes being two or three gate drops in a class, it's also hard to tell who the people are, but that is not their fault. I mean, I can get my
Yeah.
phone out and I can watch the timing. So I have nothing negative to say whatsoever. Selfishly, I would have liked to have heard the commentating.
The wind, the wind there can suck. I
Oh,
mean,
it was
it could flat out. I mean, it could blow 50, 60 miles an hour
literally,
and it's miserable.
and it
So
comes up quick. That's the
yes.
thing.
Yep.
I was standing right next to the starting gate, and one of those came through. And I'm not exaggerating. If I had put my hand out in front of my face, I would have not been able to see my hand. I mean, everybody just turns their back, hovers in, and just tries, to
Yeah.
cover their eyes. But yeah, it was just literally everything went white. It was pretty intimidating. And like somebody said, welcome to Glen Helen.
Yeah.
You've seen it all today.
One of the things that I wanted to pick your brain about and ask you about, because, when we think of vets, right, it's
Yeah.
typically it's 30 plus, right? But when you go to Glen Helen on the Vet National, you've got some 60, 70-year-old guys still riding and racing. And but I want your input. I mean, what did you think watching some of those classes of the older guys?
My first takeaway was that those guys don't know that they're 70 years old. They don't know that they're 60 years old. And I think that's such a testament to our sport. As much as we joke tongue in cheek that, yeah, the sport keeps us young or whatever, you sit in amongst some people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're talking just like the super mini class. They are
Yeah.
there. They're sure there's some people that just want to enjoy the experience, but the level of racing, and like we were saying earlier, you get a seventh or an eighth place guy, man, they're talking as if there's money on the line for these guys. And it just goes to show you we never lose that fire in the belly. We never lose that competitive nature. And when those guys came off the track, it was very impressive the amount of sportsmanship. Like you'd sit there and you'd watch, and in two corners, the guys, they were Rubbins racing. I mean, they didn't go in and try to chop their front wheels off, but they weren't afraid to push you out of the way either. Um, when you're coming from the back part of the track, you're coming towards in front of the grandstands, and you have that right hander and then that little double, and that goes in that left hander. Man, there were some guys that were running each other hot, and they come across that finish line, and every one of them, I didn't see one person except in the first moto of the day. I saw two guys. One guy came in and took the other one out, and the guy that was on the top, that punches started flying immediately. Like
Wow.
the flaggers had to break them up. Like they weren't pushing. That was full on. They were punching each other. They were knocking the stew out of each other. But with the exception of that, those guys would literally just, move each other. They were rubbing as racing, challenge the living daylights out. And then they come across, take their goggles off. They'd stop right before you go in front of the podium, that overlook, high five, knuckle punch. Good job, man. Way
Yeah.
to go. Again, it reminded me of, I'm going to show my age here. Do you remember the Bugs Bunny commercial or cartoons where the coyote, and
Yeah.
they beat the crap out of each other, and then the buzzer would go off. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. All right, see you tomorrow, man.
Yeah.
That's how it was. They just every lap was just a Donnybrook. But then when they crossed that finish line, it was, hey, let's go get a cold beer together.
Yeah.
And then you get back towards the pits and you listen to them talk about their race. They're decompressing on that race as if it was literally, an outdoor national for a
Yeah.
pro. And that's the part that I loved is you didn't sense the level of age. It was like
Yeah.
age wasn't a variable. It wasn't even an issue. And that was very impressive.
It's some of those old guys, man, they get it on. I remember when I went to Glen
Hmm.
Helen, there was a guy parked next to us, and
Yeah.
he went past me like I was tied to a freaking fence pole. I mean, the guy was, and he comes back to the pits, and I'm smoked. I was, like I said, that place you get tired quick.
Real quick.
Even if you're in shape, you
Yes.
get tired. And so he comes back in, takes his helmet off, and the guy's like 70, 75 years old. I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
he's been going to Glen Helen for 35 years and just knows a
Absolutely.
place like the back of his hand. It was just a really cool story. And just some of those old Southern California guys are incredible people to have conversations with.
Absolutely. Well, and we always say, particularly like in our triathlon world, I always say if you're sitting on the side of the swim, could be a lake, an ocean, whatever, Never, if you're not a little bit nervous when you go to get in the water, you've lost respect. I seriously think you shouldn't get in the water. If you have a little bit of butterflies, there's still that respect and reverence that you recognize that you can drown, right? When you're on the
Yeah.
bike running, you get tired, you can always stop. Get tired, make a mistake in the water, you drown. It's no game. And I always try to
Yep.
be as painfully brutal and honest as I can be. We had this young man that we worked with for about 4 years. In triathlon, we do them in 4 year increments. So he went 15 to 19. We got into where he was nationally ranked, goes to 2024. We're expecting to pretty much be the top guy in the age group that year. And ironically, not because moto is gravitated towards Claremont, but Claremont, if you look at a map, Lake Mineola is on the east side. You cross State Road 50 and you have Lake Minnehaha. And on that side is where Ken Roxon and all those guys live. And we were on the Lake Mineola side, and I had this young man, and this, I'm going to just be blunt, this pretty fat guy is standing at the front. Now it's just like a running race, right? If you're getting ready to start a 5K and somebody works themselves to the front, I would say 9 out of 10 times those dudes are fast. You always get that one a-hole that just wants to be in the opening picture, so he's out there sprinting for 100 yards to get all the photos and then blows up. But for the most part, the person that puts themselves on the front line is legit. Well, this fat guy moved my guy out of the way. And oh, my guy was pissed. He's 20 years old, 3% body fat. He's like, who's this fat fart? And I went over to him because I saw what had happened because I was standing back, said, don't, just let it go. He goes, that fat, he pushed me. I said, let it go. Well, we were literally less than a minute to the start of the race. And I'm just watching from behind. And sure enough, my guy tries to go with him. And if you know anything about swimming, the more efficient you are, the more bubbles you create, the less leverage you have in water. So as a swimmer, especially open water wise, your goal is to take a liquid object and try to make it a solid. That's where you get leverage and torque. And I could tell he was just flailing. Nothing that he wasn't swimming like anything that we train him to do. I said, "Oh, he's bit the hook."
Yeah.
And it was a mile swim. And I get to the swim exit. My guy comes out, tongues hanging out the bottom. Well, the fat guy beat him by almost 90 seconds in a 1 mile swim. So a top guy in a swim like that, for around 17, 18 minutes, that's a good swim. We were 90 seconds down on him, and my guy's tongue's hanging out. And he just yelled at me, I know I shouldn't have chased him. So the point is we get to the end of the race. Well, I did some research during the race, and the guy was an all-American swimmer. He made the Olympic trials for swimming. He just got away from swimming, put on some weight, got the dad bod going, come
Yep.
back to moto. Don't ever judge somebody by saying, oh, he's just a 55-year-old dude. If he grew up in SoCal or anywhere and he's been on a motorcycle for a long period of time, he can still haul the mail because he may not
Yeah.
be able to do it for 30 minutes, but he darn sure can do it for 2 to 3 laps. And don't underestimate him because he'll put you in the cheap seats pretty
Oh,
quick.
100%. That absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Oh, I always love that story though. It's like, man, don't chase him. You don't know anybody's background. And
No,
just
no.
because they're fat, have you seen those guys? And I wish I could remember it. There's a dude that literally is a fat dude. I mean, like 350, 400 pounds, and he rides with his shirt off and he
That
just full
is,
sends the whoops.
oh my gosh.
Maybe one of the subscribers or listeners will
He's
tell
from
us.
the Midwest.
Oh
Somebody
my
just pinged me
gosh,
not that long ago, and that guy rips though. He is,
he
he is,
shreds.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's my point. If you're sitting there on the gate thinking you've got this guy polished, first of all, he's fearless. Number
yep,
two, he's going to prove you wrong come heck or high water. Number three, he's got it going on and then some.
oh
And
yeah,
I love that video. Not that I'm advocating anybody ride without chest protectors and shirts on, but you just see that big belly, as his bike's going down, he's going up. And I was like, dude, you got to have some major amounts of self-confidence to be like, watch this, bitches. I got
yeah.
100 pounds of extra fat and I'm going to go full send mode. And I'm like, good on you, man. So I always say,
Uh,
never judge a book by its cover because you never
hey,
know who's in it.
request. I want the marketing department to clip that and post that last.
I will find that. Yeah, I will definitely find that. So if you're watching this on, or you're listening to this in a pod, definitely go back and check this portion of the podcast out on the YouTube channel because
So
I'll see if, well, I'll need to check and see. Hopefully we don't get trademark copyright stung for that, but maybe I'll reach out to him and get his permission first. I don't know how all that works, but yeah,
uh,
that's never judge a book by its cover because you
nope.
just never know who's in it. That's what I
Yep.
always say. So, but no,
Um,
it was a heck of an experience.
one of our own good friend of mine, good friend of yours, Zeb Armstrong,
Yep.
40 plus pro. He ended up having a crash on Friday in practice.
Friday. Yeah.
Wasn't able to make the weekend. He was a little bit sore, but Coach, I saw some pictures on the internet. Maybe the biggest crash as far as people wise I've ever seen in motocross at the top of Mount Saint Helen. Tell us about that, what you saw, because that was incredible.
It was like the perfect storm, no pun intended. If you're looking at that uphill, you get the left-hander at the bottom, and just the way the acceleration went, it literally looked like a crater on the moon. It literally, you could just see the hole getting bigger, excuse me, getting deeper and getting wider to the point that it was literally covering maybe all but 4 to 5 feet on either the inside or the outside going straight uphill. And you know how it is when you go to a race and you're standing there and you see the bikes go through the line, and the bikes respond exactly the same. You know, it's amazing when you sit in one location, you watch 40 bikes go through, the way the bikes sound, the way the suspension compresses and decompresses. So we're sitting adjacent to the start line, and you see the guys drag racing up the hill. And you can see the bikes were kind of hitting the edge of that pothole. And as we said earlier, by the time we get to this race, it's pretty hard to avoid it. Like, you have to make your mind up way at the bottom if you're
Yeah,
going to miss it. Well, you had a guy that came up, he tried to manual through it. He didn't, he kind of faced it. So the bike completely compressed. And then when it uncoiled, he lost all of his forward momentum. And then, of course, just the law of physics, loop out Larry, right? So bike comes out from underneath him, bike goes up and it lands perfectly. So as you're looking up the hill, the bike's sitting this way on its handlebar, laid over. Well, now comes the big pack behind him. Now imagine you're accelerating up this hill. You're now recognizing that there's somebody up there. You're trying to navigate this big, moon hole. You're trying to get to the top of the hill because it's an all-out drag race. You need all the momentum you can.
yep,
Well, then the second guy goes up. He boom, lays it down. Third guy, boom. Next thing you know, the guys coming up the hill, now they think they can thread the needle. So then they're jumping through the pothole. Now they think they're going to try to go around. Well, now they've lost their momentum and now their bike's at an angle. They tip. I was really surprised. I think there must have been 15, 20 bikes, but they literally look like they were systematically laid on the face of the hill. Well, then there's this one guy, for whatever reason, thinks he's going to thread the needle through all 20 bikes. Well, he comes up and he tries to, and he can't. And then the bike gets away from him and it just
go all the way.
about halfway down, it finally
Oh,
stopped. And I was
wow.
like, thank goodness, because by the inertia it would have picked up by the bottom, that thing would have been grenaded. Glen Helen did an incredible job. Immediately, you see the guys on the radio. They get the flagger at the very bottom of the hill where they go left. They just diverted them. They went right on the water truck line, got right back on the next straightaway, and just kept going. Gave those guys a chance to safely come down. Some of
Yeah.
them used the I think you had mentioned previously, like halfway up, that's like another route, like maybe the
Mhm.
works loop or whatever. Some of the guys were able to come through there when there was safely nobody coming. They were able to come down the hill safely, no carnage whatsoever. But here's what, again, thought was so cool. Nobody's bitching and complaining. Oh, we got stuck on the hill. We need to rerun the moto, protest. Everybody's like, all right, well, that was not fun.
Yeah.
Get back on. And then once the hill was clean, run them back up the hill. And I'm like, dude, the communication with Glen Helen was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Obviously, when it's a big pack like that, there's no way you could have superseded that whole situation. I mean, it
Yeah.
was just domino, domino, domino. And then once it became gridlock, boo, they were right on it, redirected it. They did such a phenomenal job. But those poor guys, man, it's like I'm scared to death of heights, as I said earlier. So the idea of being stuck up there and then looking down
Oh,
and
yeah.
oh, forget it, man. I'd be changing my britches after that one.
Well, and that's so steep. I mean, you're not going to, because it was about, that was a more than 3/4 up. It was kind of towards the
Oh,
top,
it was towards the top. Yeah.
but you're not going to get on your motorcycle and make it to the top. It's
Mm-mm.
it's too steep. Like you have to turn around and go back down the hill, right?
Yep.
So I that's yeah,
It's
I
insane.
when I saw the picture, I'm like, oh my God.
Yep. It was
What a
crazy.
yard sale.
Well, and then, we're talking about getting stuck going up it. This is where it was impressive to watch Tyler on that start, because Josh Mosiman was competing against him, and Mosiman just is so incredibly fast. And, Josh making pro nationals gives you an idea how quick he is. And you watch him on the starting gate, his timing is impeccable. Second shift is unbelievable. The momentum he carries through. And he was always 3, 4 bike lengths behind on that start. And then when you get to that first uphill after that left-hander and you go uphill, that Stark would just walk 3, 4 bikes they'd put on him on the way up.
Yeah.
And Josh would run him down, get him about a bike length going into Talladega, go up those uphills, 3, 4 bikes, lap, after lap after lap after lap. So,
That's where on the Stark you could, they have different power modes, right? I think it's
yep,
5 different power. You could easily, when you're going up the uphill, flip the button to 80 horsepower,
yep.
have the, you know what I mean? And then flip it back down for the rest of the track. That's what's kind of cool and unique about it, but it's almost like
Hmm.
cheating, you know what I mean? Just because
Yep.
they're so much advanced and the power difference is substantial.
Well, the one thing that I thought was interesting, we were talking about earlier about the White brothers, and I remember seeing the ads in motocross action and dirt bike, and be a 2-page spread, and they were promoting their suspension or motor services, and it was always desert related. They were the 4-stroke specialists, and then remember when they would have the 4-stroke nationals in California, that was a big deal, and I remember it being covered in the magazines, and it was so cool. Think about how we used to look at that as kind of like an offset, segment of our business. It was all 2 strokes, 2 strokes, 2 strokes, 2 strokes. You'd kind of push that aside. Well, now 4 strokes are common. And now we're looking at electric as kind of that offset. And it wasn't that long ago that, uh, you're great friends with Zeb. Most people don't even know that Zeb Armstrong played a significant role in the development of that YZ400. Doug Henry gets a lot of credit for racing it and getting it its first win, but our buddy Zeb was, pretty much the guy that built, very similar to what Trey Kennard's doing for the boys at Honda, right? He's the one
Yep.
that shakes the bikes down. It's like, am I saying his last name right? Is it Marias? That does
Morris.
it, Morris for
Yep.
KTM. He was
Yep.
ripping out there as well. People don't realize how those guys, and I hate to say it this way, but it's true. I mean, these guys put their lives on the line to shake down bikes before they put it, the
Yeah.
pro, the top guy for that team on that bike. And when you think about how much Zeb had to shake down that YZ400, trying to figure things out, things breaking, things not working, because obviously it's the world of the unknown. Now and was it Alta? I think that was the first
Alta.
electric bike, right?
Yep.
So you look at all the stuff that they did and all the risks that they put themselves through. Bikes were overheating, melting electrical units and all that. Now we have a Stark out there where they're out there racing a 20, 25-minute moto, strong from start to finish. Like you said, you can adjustable power and all that. It's no longer, oh, there's that 4-stroke White brothers. That's just those in the desert kind of guys. Well, now look at our racing at the highest level.
Yeah.
Look at those 4-stroke motors. We kind of scoffed at the Altas, and then you're like, yeah, that'll never work. And then Stark's out there. Now you got Honda with their e-bikes, you got KTM with their e-bikes. And my hope is that the Starks, those guys can get enough funding where they can compete against the big OEMs, because unfortunately it's going to be like, hey, thanks for being a pioneer. Thanks for breaking the ice.
Yeah.
Now we're just going to eat you alive and put you out of business. I hope that doesn't happen, because they've got a lot of R&D in those. But when you look at the fact that Honda didn't start with anything and look at where they're already at, tells you that they have to be getting some of that R&D, which is, it's par for any course. My question is, what's going to be the next step? And I know that the listeners are going to hate it, I'm just saying conceptually, think about this. What if half the field's now electric bikes? What's going to be that offset? It used to be the 4-strokes, White brothers. Then it was competitive 4-strokes. Now we're talking about the e-bikes. And you're like, because I was talking, ironically, with Zeb when I was talking to Olaf and I was talking to Zeb. You look at those bikes, they're flat out competitive. I mean, when you watch those guys ride those bikes, you see what Justin Hill and Josh Hill have done with them. They're just outright competitive. They're not the laughing stock where it's pogo stick suspended and seats are falling off and bars are all bent. They're legit.
Yeah.
I saw a couple tents there. Kehoe Racing. Is that Eric Kehoe?
No, that's actually one of my DCMX customers.
Okay.
Kehoe Racing. Really good people. They're now on Starks, from what I understand. So
well, and that's what caught my attention, because I walked
yep.
by there and they had 3 or 4 10x10s and very professionally laid out and organized, very impressive. And when I saw Kehoe Racing, of course, I was thinking about Eric, but I didn't see him there. I couldn't really put a face with anybody. The only reason why I bring that up is, let's say it was Eric Kehoe. This is a guy that we all know, great professional, factory Honda, the whole 9 yards. I was thinking, if he's gone the Stark route, that just shows you the level of commitment that somebody with that high level of talent has enough confidence in that bike that they're willing to go race it. It's like that it's your client, so I don't want to chop up his name. What's her first name?
I have to go look, coach.
That's okay. I don't
There,
mean to put you on the spot, but
yep.
props to the Kehoe group there because their presentation was great and their bikes were fast on the track and they handled extremely well.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking a little bit about that torque delivery and everything. I'd be very interesting to talk to like Bones at Pro Circuit or maybe Ziggy at Factory Connection. You know, when you get on the hammer like that, I probably should get Derek Harris to explain it to us with HP development. You know, when you're under full load like that, and it's a different, but yet the same, but yet a little bit different on the way that electric motor puts that
Yeah.
torque to the ground. I think it'd be fascinating.
I think the valving would probably have to be quite a bit stiffer, right, from
Yeah,
keeping the thing to start, moving from back, back and forth. But
I'm
yeah, it's
just
definitely
amazed.
interesting stuff.
Well, when you look at a two-stroke, right, nice and light and accelerates quickly, think about suspension. Then a four-stroke, heavier, a little bit more
Yep.
torque. Then you take the start. Not it's not any heavier, maybe give or take a little bit, but the amount of torque has got to be. It
Yeah.
seems to me, at least from the naked eye, it seems like the torque would be 2 to 3 times more than a traditional four-stroke, which is hard for me to fathom because you can
Yeah.
be in fifth gear and it seems like in a four-stroke, you just roll the throttle and blip the clutch and it'll still pull. it
Yep.
may it may be struggling a little bit, but it can get out of its own way. And to
Yeah.
think that the Stark has that much more, so it was cool to
They're,
watch.
they're pretty
It's,
incredible.
yeah, well, especially when you have one beating Josh Moseman.
Yeah.
He's phenomenal. And to think, and that was to me what I was talking to a couple of people I was hanging out with. I was like, dude, that guy's a good rider. Don't get me wrong, but think about the bikes, right? If you put Brownie and you put Nicoletti and you put um, Rusty Holland and you put Michael Lessie, you put them all on comparable bikes or the same bike, their lap times aren't going to be significantly different,
No.
you know.
Yeah.
And wow, here he is on an electric bike ahead of Josh, and Josh was riding really well. But
Yeah.
in all fairness to Josh, you watch the uphills and downhills, and that's where the Stark got its advantage.
The
So
power,
it's
sheer power.
crazy. The low end torque was nuts.
Coach, we have just a few minutes left
Yeah,
on the pod today, but I do want to get to one, probably the most important question and topic of this show.
yeah.
And that is, now that you have been to Glen Helen,
Mm-hmm.
um, briefly, is there one thing that you would maybe change or concentrate on more when you were working with one of the riders to prepare for World Vets, knowing the climate, track, and just kind of how the whole weekend goes? Is there something that you would maybe change or
It
concentrate on?
it's a brilliant question because if you know anything, from a physiological standpoint, we're always striving to keep the athlete centered over the bike. So if you think about the three contact points, hands, feet, and knees, well, most people don't realize the muscle that runs from your pubic bone to the inside of your knee is the adductor muscle. That's the muscle that allows you to clamp onto that bike. It's a very hard muscle to isolate, and you definitely will struggle to isolate it if you're using fixed equipment. So when we looked at those elevation changes, yes, we always make sure that our athletes are focusing on inner thigh strength. So that way the bike can kind of dance underneath them the way Jet allows it. And then you also want to be able to pull that bike in to avoid the dreaded side swap. With the way that track G'd out, both, on just every straightaway as well as the uphills and downhills, I would definitely put more of an emphasis on inner thigh strength and flexibility because strength without flexibility, as we've said, is useless. Flexibility without strength is useless as well. But that ability to stay centered over the bike, we do a lot with proprioceptive balance, being able to look further ahead, kind of anticipating where the bike's going to go without wrestling it, let it kind of do its thing, kind of like Jet does, let it dance. But I would definitely focus on inner thighs.
Okay.
That and the ability to stabilize blood sugar. Not that it's not important elsewhere, but up there because the speeds are so incredibly fast. And as you know, the faster you go, the worse the consequences. So there's
Yeah.
a direct correlation between depth perception and stabilizing blood sugar. So being able to pick up on those holes and not G out and hit them would be that would be the two things I'd focus on for sure.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but you're absolutely right because the terrain changes there very frequently.
Crazy.
I mean, lap after lap, it changes,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets really rough. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure you have the depth perception and being able to look ahead to see, because otherwise that place will bite you and it'll bite you quick.
Yeah.
So
And that's something that's very impressive was the idea that we didn't see. In fact, I don't remember seeing one person go off the track on a gurney. I didn't see an ambulance one time. Now I may have missed it. Somebody may tell
yeah,
me that I missed it, but I honestly didn't see it versus some of the races we see here in the Southeast where like the local hospital is trying to shut down a couple of the races just because, first of all, the track maintenance is pathetic and it gets so rock hard that it backs up the ER room.
Wow.
Literally, the local hospital is trying to shut it. They don't want to shut the racetrack down. They just want one of the two races to be shut down because they promote it as it's perfectly prepped and it's got good moisture and you got good traction. Then they get the races started. They don't do hardly any track maintenance. It becomes blue groove and it's just a concrete jungle. And literally, it's gotten so bad that the joke is how many riders are going to come off on a gurney this moto. Like that's literally the
Wow.
joke that people have sitting trackside. And then you back up the ER. And so the hospital's like, we can't have this. So,
Interesting.
well, to me, it's a lack of respect to the racers. I think, unfortunately, they're gloating in the idea that they're just walking around with duffel bags full of cash, and they're very arrogant about it. And over here, you've got parents that are visiting their kids in the hospital because the track has gotten blue groove completely blown out. I'm not saying that we're asking for a buttercup track, but that's dangerous.
Yeah,
And you see it
sure.
by the number of ambulance trips. But the promoter's making money. He doesn't really care. And that to me is a shame.
Yeah.
So we didn't see that with Glen Helen. I mean, those guys were watering constantly, and they were prepping what they could when they could, as they could, and it showed. Nobody that I saw went off on an ambulance. So good
They
weekend.
do a they do a fantastic job there.
Yeah, they
So shout
do.
out to Bud and Lori, Glen
Amen to
Helen
that.
for a incredible event, incredible facility, and
Yep.
an all around good time, Coach. I'm glad you had a great time. Next year, I promise, I will join you there.
Yep.
We'll do the live pod from there, and we'll have a good time. But I want to
Absolutely.
thank you. I want to thank all of our listeners, all of our subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so much for investing your time to watch and listen to our show. We greatly appreciate it. Make sure you guys drop those comments in the comment section below. Again, we love hearing the feedback, the comments, get new topics for upcoming shows. So make sure you continue to do that. And Coach, any parting words?
Just want to reiterate what you're saying. Huge thanks to all those that are subscribing. Thank you for the comments, direct messages. They're awesome. We do have a full year it's ahead of us when we get through the month of December. We're going to have a very systematic talking points, and we're looking forward to sharing that with you. But thank you for the support. Thank you for the increased numbers. And we look forward to seeing you guys at the races.
We'll see you guys on the next episode, which will be number 8. And have a great rest of the month and weeks and years. Coach, we're getting ready to start a new year. This is
Yeah.
insane. So, but
New Year's in double digits. Look out.
I know. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you soon.
Peace.